So as I was saying, Rick, you've been my teacher in one form or another in many different ways, and I've been blessed to be part of your online course that you teach, that I've read your books, and I'm now actually listening to the newest book on resilience. And one of the things that I've found from your teaching is that, one, we get the deep sense that you live into this, that this is your personal practice. The second thing I get from your teaching is that there's this wonderful broad encompassing of the biology and humanness of how we function in this human experience, along with very concrete experiential steps that we can take to live into. So thank you for your teaching. Thank you for your wisdom, and thank you for your presence.
Thank you.
And for those of you who don't know Rick, a little bit that was my personal side of knowing Rick. Let me also give you the professional bio, because it's quite rich and deep. So he is Dr. Rick Hanson. He is a PhD. He's a neuropsychologist. He's the author of many books, including this most recent one, Resilient, which is the topic of today's conversation. It's called Resilient, and I love the subtitle, How to Grow an Unshakable Core of Calm, Strength, and Happiness. And who the heck wouldn't want that? Rick's the founder of the Wellspring Institute of Neuroscience and Contemplative Wisdom, and he's an affiliate of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And he's been an invited speaker at Oxford, at Stanford, at Hartford, and he's taught at meditation centers worldwide. And I was actually quite lucky to take his on-site course here at the Barry Center for Buddhist Study. It was a joy to be with him. So welcome, Rick. Welcome.
Oh, thank you.
And I guess the first question I have for you is, why this book? Why did you write this?
Yeah. Well, the book is based on the online Foundations of Wellbeing program, which is really well organized, highly accessible, inexpensive, kind of year-long deep dive in transformation. And based on that, I wanted to write a book that pulled together the 12 pillars of well-being. That's what we call them, which became the 12 chapters in the book, Resilient. So that's kind of the basis in part. The other part of it was that, I think for a lot of people, there's a sense these days that the cavalry is not coming, that there's something becoming increasingly frayed and fragile about the larger networks around us that should be supporting individuals. And so we are increasingly left to ourselves to dig deep and grow strengths inside to deal with challenging times. And so that was the other reason I wrote the book.
Yeah. So
also, I should say kind of a memoir, actually, of personal growth, because as people know who read it, I'm very intimate in the book. I really talk about my own struggles, my own journey, my own lessons, my own screw-ups, my own mistakes. And so in part, it's a reflection for me, I'm kind of getting a little older, toward, the late, I joke, I say I'm in late middle age, but maybe it's late middle age, I don't know what, but anyway. So a lot of it, I looked back. It's kind of a reflection about what were the really important lessons, and then trying to summarize in a book and offer to people kind of most of what I've learned along the way about resilient well-being, no matter how wobbly the world is around you.
Yeah, I think that's what made it so real, is that you attach it to your own, you calling yourself nerdy and sort of introverted and left out in many ways, and how that resilience came through, both in your family life, and then you went away to college, and some of the things that were happening in California. And one of the ways in which you boil down sort of the simplicity of what our human needs are, you said that there's 3 core needs.
Right.
And that really started out the whole trajectory of the book. So could you explain those to our viewers? But before you do, I will also say, you guys are very quiet, you viewers. Can you type in questions or thoughts or even feedback that you would have for Rick or myself as we go through this? Make it a conversation. That would be great.
Yeah, let's make it useful for you. Happy to do this. Well, let's see. Resilience is in reference to needs, because we need to be resilient in order to manage our needs. And it's through managing our needs that we sustain well-being. Resilience is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. And one of the things also in the book that I try to do is look at resilience in a fresh way, rather than, I think, the overly narrow and kind of formulaic way. people often talk about it these days as only about recovering from terrible traumas. Well, that's an important aspect of resilience, but we need resilience for more than just surviving the worst day of our life. We need resilience to sustain well-being and thrive every day of our life. So that's in reference to needs. As an overarching framework, I think there are three fundamental needs. This is a framework that's well supported in psychology and biology in general. Animals, including big, complicated ones like us, need to be safe, need to be satisfied, need to be connected. And that way of thinking about things immediately takes you into, okay, where are my needs doing okay? And where am I hurting? What's missing? What's being left out? And therefore, what would be the useful inner strengths to grow inside myself that are matched to the needs that most call out for attention these days? And that then becomes an extremely useful question. And what the book is about is 12 overarching inner strengths that we explore in some detail. And it's a lot about identifying for oneself what are the most important inner strengths, the most important psychological resources like mindfulness or self-compassion or grit or gratitude or self-worth that would be really, really, really important to grow these days. And then we get into the technology in the book, in a sense, that's a geeky word. Really, it's just practical, positive neuroplasticity of how do you actually grow these strengths inside yourself through tapping the hidden power of everyday experiences.
So, first of all, thank you for couching it that way. We just actually finished videotaping for our certificate in positive psychology, the module on resilience. And
interesting.
It was done by Dr. Maria Serwa. And one of the first things that she did was couch resilience, just as you did, in a broader form. So often we think of getting tough and overcoming hurdles and traumatic events and really overcoming the difficulties of life versus looking at resilience as a daily practice for human flourishing. And that is so embedded in us to try and lift ourselves up from a tough time. This idea of using resilience as a daily basis for our human flourishing.
Yeah, to build on what you said there, it's like if anxiety comes up in your mind, which is common, can you be resilient with it? If self-criticism comes pounding on yourself, can you be resilient with that? If you start getting sucked into just ruminating, can you be resilient with that? So in many ways, I think for many people, day to day, the greatest challenges to well-being arise between the ears. It's not so much what's happening outside. I mean, that is what it is, but the actual moment-to-moment factors that wear down well-being, wear down happiness, and therefore as well, wear down long-term physical health. The large majority of those factors for most people originate inside their own mind.
Yeah, you talk about in the book, first dart and second dart. So let's get specific. So if we have worry, so say this being resilient, not just with anxiety or a thought or concern, but worry is a form of this rumination of just not knowing what the future holds, the uncertainty and the worry about what could be. Knowing the first dart and the second, how would you help people use those 12 pillars to say manage the mind state of worry?
Yeah, that's great. So first dart, second dart is a metaphor from early Buddhism. And it's the idea that life does have suffering. It has inevitable pain and loss and discomfort of various kinds. That's the first dart of life. But then we add our reactions to that inevitable, inescapable discomfort, pain, suffering, etc. of life, and that's the suffering we create ourselves. So let's say that someone's worried about something in the future. Well, it's natural to worry. In the beginning, it's a first start kind of experience. It's normal to worry. Worry's useful. Then the question is, am I taking practical action with regard to the worry and doing the best I can? And then can I be at peace no matter what? So then the question becomes for me as a very practical therapist, real person kind of guy, what would be useful? So let's suppose that I'm worried about something in a relationship. And if someone is mad at me, or I feel like I did something wrong, or I'm concerned about where it's going. Let's suppose then at that point I take action as best I can. I try to reach out to the person and acknowledge my own faults in the matter if there were any. I try to think about how to deal with this person in the future, let's say. But after that, if I'm still worried about it, the book covers a variety of resources, but I'll give you three right now that I think are really useful. One is, in general, when you feel cared about by other people in genuine ways that are large and small, and they'll be mainly small because that's just in the flow of life. Your dog likes it when you get home. Your friend appreciates you. Someone, liked your Facebook picture when you came back from a trip and said a nice little thing about it. Whatever it might be. Your boss gives you a word of praise. Your partner really loves you. Large and small, slow down to receive that experience into yourself for a breath or two or three. And literally that will tend to increase the process of consolidating that experience as a lasting change of neural structure and function. So increasingly, drop by drop, synapse by synapse, you fill yourself up with feeling cared about, feeling also the body sensations and the emotions that you've got inner allies with you. Well, much research has shown that as we grow the sense of being cared about by other people and being worthy of being cared about, we're more able to dial down the volume on anxiety. Mm-hmm. We're more able to stand up to anxiety. We don't feel as much worry. That's a useful inner resource to grow, first. Second is to recognize your own strengths. I think for many people in general, and to generalize, I think for women in particular, there's a tendency to really underestimate how strong they actually are. And we feel anxious in part because there's a mismatch between threat and resources. We feel outgunned, overpowered by what's coming at us. Well, one way to lower that gap between threat and resources is to increase your accurate appraisal of your own strengths. So when you do something that involves feeling strong, like being determined, sticking up for somebody else, say a child, a friend, a political cause, let's say, or you lift that weight, that last repetition, or you hold that yoga pose the last 10 seconds, you grind through the last minute of your run. When you have an opportunity to feel strong, again, use positive neuroplasticity to slow down, stay with the feeling of it for a breath or two or longer, start noticing what's rewarding about it, what feels good about being strong. And in the process of that, you will grow self-confidence. You'll grow a sense of fortitude and capability and endurance, so that then you'll worry less because you'll feel, more like, hey, it might suck, but I can handle it when it sucks. And we're all going to be okay, basically. So that's another key resource. And so I'll leave it at 2 and let you jump in here.
Well, because I'm curious, is this what you're describing? Is this the H.E.A.L acronym? It sounds like there are some pieces of attending to worry through the H.E.A.L acronym that you spell out, which is lovely. And I think very helpful and practical for people to follow. So
thank you for saying that. Yeah, in a very summary way, you know my material. I really summarized how to do positive neuroplasticity, how to change your brain. But you're right, I use an acronym H.E.A.L, H-E-A-L in general to describe this. And in the book, in the learning chapter in particular, I talk about it. But it's essentially have a beneficial experience in the first place, usually because you're already having it. Just notice it, And then second step, don't waste it on your brain. Enrich that experience, absorb it into yourself. And if you want, you can even link that positive material to something negative so that the positive material can gradually associate to it in neural networks and soothe it and even replace it. So that gives us the acronym H.E.A.L, have, enrich, absorb, and link.
There we go. There it is. Yahoo.
Yeah, it sounds complicated. And there's a lot of detail and there's a lot of application, including dealing with old pain and trauma and other kinds of issues. But the essence is really simple. When you're having a beneficial experience, especially one that's the basis for growing key resources inside yourself that would really help with your needs these days, when you're having those kind of beneficial experiences, flag them, value them. Be intimate with them. Let yourself receive them and thereby grow the good inside yourself, literally hardwired into your own nervous system.
Gosh, this is so important for our day-to-day resilience because it's so easy to miss the small, subtle fast moving, beautiful things. I mean, we teach a lot about your one sentence, which I think sums up this concept very clearly, that the brain is like Velcro for the bad and Teflon for the good. And I sometimes just take a walk and I'll find myself thinking of other things. And then I notice, no, look at the sunshine, look at the trees. This act of everyday mindfulness is so fundamental. And your 3 ways of thinking about how to interact. I don't know how you couch this, but I love this idea of like, let it be, let it grow. Do you want to talk about those things?
Thanks.
Because I think that those are wonderful ways of thinking about it as well.
When stuff comes up in the mind, right? Worry, irritation, or sadness, or hurt, or we realize we've got a problem, we're going to deal with something. There are basically just 3 ways to deal with it. And they all work together, but it's really helpful to think of them as kind of a roadmap. First, we be with it. We feel the feelings, we experience the experience. If we jump too quickly into fixing before we have really felt, then fixing doesn't have traction. All right. So first, we feel it, we be with it, we explore it, we try to understand what's going on here. The mind's kind of like a parfait. It's useful to look down to the deeper layers, right? But that's not all that we should do. We also need to make deliberate efforts in our mind to nudge the mind in one direction or another. So that takes us to the second way to work with the mind, which is to reduce the negative, including through letting go. And then the third great way to work with the mind is to grow resources inside it, to let in. In a sense, if the mind is like a garden, we can witness it, pull weeds, or plant flowers. They all work together. I tend to focus on planting flowers because that's the part that's generally been most left out, I think, in psychology and, frankly, spiritual practice. The matter of cultivating the wholesome. It's really important. And also I focus on growing flowers because it's motivating, because it's usually enjoyable to grow flowers in the garden of the mind.
I love using archetypes, and we usually use such powerful archetypes when we're thinking about things we want to emulate. I actually like the archetype of the gardener, but it's not as sexy or as powerful or as wow, look at that phenomenal archetype of the powerful planter or gardener. It is such a useful metaphor, though, because it really does.
I think so. And honestly, a little bit of a kind of a historical detail that's really pretty cool. The Buddha was a farmer.
I did not know this.
Yeah, he was a farmer. I mean, that was the technology of the time, 2,500 years ago. It was agrarian and kind of medieval in a sense, northern India. And he was, born into a fairly wealthy family of farmers, essentially. And so there's a lot of language in this really great stuff about enlightenment that has to do with nutriments, what do you feed? Do you feed the weeds or do you feed the flowers? In the same way, they use a different metaphor these days. Do you feed the wolf of hate or do you feed the wolf of love inside the mind, right? And there's a lot in that early teaching about withdrawing fuel from that which is painful or harmful for ourselves and others. And I think that's a key point. In the mind, stuff arises.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'll just finish. In the mind, stuff arises. The key question is not what arises. Over time, you can nudge it in a better direction, a more skillful and a happier direction. But in the moment, it's there. Then the key question is, do you feed it? Do you obsess about it? Do you get into it? Do you identify with it? Do you go round and round about it? Do you argue for it? Do you argue for your neurosis with your friends? Like, oh, I need my neurosis, right? Or on the other hand, do you withdraw food from it and feed more positive, beneficial qualities inside yourself? And I think that's the moment-to-moment key choice.
Yeah, 2 things. First of all, I didn't know Siddhartha was a farmer. I knew he came from a rich, princely family, but I don't equate farming with
I know, but if you think about that, their wealth was agrarian. I mean, it was a clan of well-to-do farmers, essentially. Wow.
And I didn't know that until
farmers and warriors, because you had to be a warrior to protect with the harvest. But essentially, I mean, you just think about what it was like for him growing up and the day-to-day life. It was very, very much about the harvest and the farming process. And what are the seeds, right? And do you water them and do you fertilize them? And then do you harvest the fruits?
So this idea of let it be, let it go, and then let it grow. You had actually talked about using the flowers to pull weeds, which is not usually
Oh,
a
that's
normal
very
way.
interesting too. Yeah, I think there's a place for directly going after the weeds, but very often, like for example, self-criticism, right? So there's a place for directly arguing with the inner critic and putting a funny hat on it and imagining it as just like a Disney villain, just a goofball, annoying, but not very credible. All right, there's a place for that. But that only goes so far. And unfortunately, also sometimes when we try to fight our personal bad habits or tendencies, it sticks us to them. What you resist persists, and the saying. So what's often really useful is to acknowledge that problematic tendency. All right, and then think about what would be a useful resource to grow alongside it. What would be a flower to grow alongside, let's say, that weed, such as in reference to self-criticism, as I went through earlier, feeling cared about, or feeling strong, or feeling of worth in general, or self-compassion, or just happiness altogether, or a more general sense of perspective about, most of our mistakes are not that big a deal. And in the long sweep of history, they really don't matter that much. So meanwhile, try to learn, move on, and lighten up. That's a flower to grow in the garden of the mind, is the things I said there. So that's the general principle of, that as to focus on growing resources, and gradually over time, much as in a literal garden, the inner resources would grow in the mind, crowd out the weeds.
Love that. So coming from an educational organization, I actually so enjoy your chapters on learning and how important it is to use that. So before we go, though, I want to make sure that people have a moment to actually practice in community what we're talking about in terms of cultivating flowers. So I'm going to put this up, which is his book, obviously, that we've been talking about. And I'd like to ask those of you who are on, you guys have been one of the quietest groups I've ever seen, I must say. No one made a comment. They must be so entranced with what you have to say that they're not.
That's a hopeful interpretation.
Yes,
that's
bored
right. Out of their gourds.
No, that's not it. But here's what I'd like to do to practice in community building flowers. If you can share in the comments, spotting a strength of Rick's that came through, a gift that you got from Rick, something that he helped you grow by his metaphors, please write that in right now in the comments so that we can practice as a group, not only growing these flowers in our own minds, but actually helping other people see what they've given us to help us grow. There are all kinds of questions. So they're not coming in on my end for some reason. Oh, that's not good. So apparently we have
curse you, Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah. So I guess I can't read them. I usually like to pop them up on the screen. I'm not sure why they're not coming in, but those of you who are making comments, I'm sorry. I would normally put them up on the screen. I would ask questions. Sonia, if you could pop some of them into my chat with you, I might read a few of them. But if there's some questions in particular, I'm noticing the time, and I told Rick we'd be done at 11:30, so we're going to actually close out, and we can read these flowers. I guess afterwards, Rick, because I can't see them either. Too bad, right? And I want to end, if Sonia, if you haven't done so already, put in the Amazon link directly to Rick's book. That would be great if she hasn't done so already. And then I will go ahead and also share with you all some freebies on Whole Being Institute's website. This is a free course on the inspired life, basically the 5 dimensions of well-being as we see them. So I want to thank you, Rick, for being here. It's been an absolute delight being live with you and being able to hear you. And for the rest of you who are on, I'm sorry I can't see your comments. It makes me sad, but I will read them afterwards.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. And if you like, I'll offer 3 kind of summary takeaways.
Thank you.
Okay, great. One, as you move through your day, half a dozen times, less than half a minute at a time usually, slow down to take in and to receive into yourself whatever would be useful and enjoyable. Maybe it's an insight into how to interact with your teenager more skillfully. Maybe it's just a moment of relaxation with a cup of tea. Maybe it's just a feeling of gratitude for being able to have food and fresh water, whatever it might be. A sense of getting something done. Slow it down and just kind of take it in. First suggestion. Second suggestion, know one thing, maybe two or three, but for sure one thing that you're specifically trying to grow inside yourself these days. A high priority inner resource, inner strength of one kind or another. Might be greater patience, greater self-worth, greater commitment to exercise, greater commitment to eating well, perhaps, more feeling of being liked by other people. Whatever it might be, know what is that one thing? And then when you know it explicitly, deliberately look for opportunities to experience it or factors of it, and then deliberately slow down, as I've said, for a breath or two or longer to receive it into yourself and to help it hardwire into your nervous system. And then the third suggestion I have is for a minute or more a day, come down into what I call deep green. I call it the green zone, where we come down into a deep sense of safe enough, satisfied enough, and connected enough, at least now, at least in the present moment, moment after moment after moment, for a minute or longer. And with that deep sense of enough satisfaction, enough safety, and enough connection, there could be a deep, calming sense of inner peace, inner contentment, and inner love. And that's just a minute or more, but that resetting down into deep green will increasingly stabilize you in that place. So those are my three suggestions, three takeaways. The total amount of time that's involved is less than 10 minutes a day. I think we can all do that. And as we do that, we grow the good inside ourselves for our own sake and that of other beings as well.
There you go. See what I mean about him being very pragmatic, but very deep in terms of how he explains it. Those three things are great things to leave with. Thank you so much, Rick. It's been a pleasure being here. Everybody go out and buy his book. You'll love it. You'll love his teaching and take his course as well if you can. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us on Whole Being Wednesday. Thank you for your comments. I will read them after the fact. And I'll see you next week on Whole Being Wednesday. Much love, everybody. Have a great day.